Resuming debate, the honourable member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Speaker, it's a pleasure for me to be able to take part in this debate today on the standing orders. While this topic might seem technical, it is actually the foundation upon which everything we do as members of Parliament rests. The rules of procedure, or standing orders, of this place determine whose voice gets heard, how we resolve the difficult issues facing our country today, how we balance competing interests, and whether the decisions that we make truly reflect the expectations of Canadians. I would argue that today's debate may well be one of the most important ones that we will have during this Parliament. If we have a Parliament where MPs can bring those voices, listen to the people who are affected by government decisions, hear evidence and testimony from experts, debate ideas in an open and respectful way, then be accountable back to Canadians for the choices that we make, we will end up with better policies and a democracy where everyone feels that they have participated. But sadly, that is not always how things have been in this House. There has been for some time now an imbalance between the executive branch and the legislative. Too often, by the time bills get to committee, they are already finalized and there's not much room for amendment. The decorum in this House, especially during question period, is so disrespectful that teachers actually use us as an example to their students of how not to behave. Partisanship and discipline sometimes blind us to the good ideas that might come from members of other parties. And Parliament is not as inclusive, modern, or efficient as it could be. If we want our democracy to work better, that begins by making this place work better. I recently held a town hall meeting in my constituency on this topic, on democratic and parliamentary reform. And some of the ideas I'm proposing today actually came from that town hall. And we also don't need to reinvent the wheel. I'm proposing a number of things that have been proposed before in reports over the years on how to modernize this House. Democracy is a verb, not a noun, and we have to keep on working to improve it. J'estime que nous devons en faire plus pour améliorer l'atmosphère générale et que nous devons en faire plus pour rendre cet endroit plus professionnel. Pour cela, il faudrait d'abord améliorer le décorum. Nous sommes les représentants de la population et nous devons donner un meilleur exemple au pays. In this regard, I would like to talk about enhancing the role of the Speaker. Right now, the Speaker, as has been mentioned before, is given lists from the whips as to who will be speaking or asking a question. But it was not always this way. It used to be that members would stand up and the Speaker had the flexibility to choose who were to ask a question or make a statement. In fact, the rules already provide for this. This way, the Speaker could make sure that everyone has their turn. But it would also give the Speaker the ability to penalize members who are constantly disruptive by not recognizing them until the behavior improves. It would also reduce the ability of the party whips to determine which topics are brought up and by whom. I believe that this is a very interesting solution and something that we should study further. In addition, I think we should weigh the advantages and disadvantages of giving the Speaker more of a say over the parliamentary agenda. Canada has a parliament where the government side has more say over the agenda than almost any other legislative body. One proposal, which was first mentioned in the 1993 report on House management, is that the Speaker have more say over the use of time allocation and closure. One possibility would be that the Speaker, with the counsel of a body such as a more transparent and reformed Board of Internal Economy, acts as the final arbiter in cases where there is no consensus on how many more hours or days of debate are needed. This would be one potential solution to balance the rights of members to speak on topics that are important to their constituents, the right of the opposition to use reasonable delay tactics to garner public support, and the need of governments to be able to see their legislation come to a vote. J'aimerais également formuler un certain nombre de propositions en vue d'améliorer nos travaux en comité. Je souhaiterais que le gouvernement commence à renvoyer des projets de loi en comité avant la deuxième lecture, de sorte que les députés de tous les partis puissent se prononcer avant que la mesure ne devienne politique gouvernementale à l'étape de la deuxième lecture. The referral of bills to committee after first reading is not a new idea. In fact, it was brought up in two separate reports of the Liaison Committee in 1993 and 1997, and again in the Democratic Reform Action Plan in 2004. And it was one of the suggestions at my town hall. This would be one of the best ways to ensure that MPs can have real and meaningful input on debates. With regard to how we elect committee chairs and vice chairs, there are options that we could look at to ensure that the chair has the full confidence of all committee members and that she or he presides over the committee in a truly neutral manner. In the UK, committee chairs are elected directly by the entire House. À l'Assemblée nationale de Québec, les présidents et vice-présidents des comités soient élus par une majorité des députés du gouvernement et de l'opposition. This could help decrease partisanship in committees. These are both ideas I think need to be investigated further. I also note that in the 2004 Democratic Reform Action Plan, it was proposed that committees be given the power to do prior review of government appointments. This means that the committee could look at future vacancies in their subject area and request that the government submit the name of a proposed candidate for review before the appointment is finalized. Right now, committees can review appointments, but only after the fact. It might make sense to pursue this idea further. I also believe that committees should be more transparent and accountable to the people who sent us here. Meetings should be held in public and televised as much as possible. I believe this allows for greater public participation and interest in our work, which engages more people in our democracy. One interesting idea from my town hall meeting is that we stop sitting with our own parties during committee. We mix it up. I think that would certainly be something interesting to try. Mr. Speaker, this is no longer the same place that it was 150 years ago, when gray-haired white men traveled by train here and they deliberated just amongst themselves to decide what was best for the people. We now have technology that allows not only constant communication with one another, but also with those we represent. Our constituents have the expectation that we will be there, accessible, listening and consulting with them. And yet this House functions like it's still stuck in the 19th century. I believe we need to provide MPs with more time in our constituencies to hear the views of those we represent and make better use of the time that we do spend here in Parliament. Nous pourrions rendre cette Chambre plus inclusive et propice à la vie de famille. Je voudrais proposer que nous mettions fin aux séances du vendredi. Nous avons tous deux ou plusieurs bureaux. Certains d'entre nous sont à 14 heures de distance. Pour ma part, j'ai la chance de représenter une circonscription proche. Il faut faire en sorte que des gens à tous les stades de leur vie puissent siéger au Parlement. Certains s'opposeront sans doute à ma suggestion d'éliminer les séances de vendredi, puisqu'il n'y aurait plus de période de questions de vendredi. Voici ce que je réponds à cela. On pourrait instituer une période de questions du Premier ministre, selon l'engagement pris par notre parti pendant la dernière campagne électorale. De plus, nous pourrions compenser les vendredis perdus en établissant une chambre parallèle. And it doesn't have to be Fridays. I think we can be flexible in terms of it could be Mondays, it could be other days. But I think the key is we make our time here more efficient and we spend more time listening to the constituents who sent us here. Setting up a parallel chamber, such as Westminster Hall in the UK, would allow MPs more time to speak without extending the hours late into the evening. Although some evening sittings were eliminated years ago, there are still exceptions, as we know. For example, the standing orders allow for extended hours in June, take-note debates are always in the evening, and closure motions are voted at 8 p.m. A second debating chamber would allow for more take-note debates and more member statements. In fact, one proposal would be to make it possible to initiate take-note debates on the request of a certain threshold of MPs, perhaps 50 from the opposition side and 50 from the government side. Regardless of which of these options we choose, we need to look carefully at ways to ensure that the hours that we spend here are as productive as possible, so that we can free up more time to spend with our families and with our constituents. Making our Parliament work better for Canadians is an issue that transcends partisan boundaries, as we've seen today. And I look forward to more dialogue about some of the ideas that I've proposed, as well as the ideas that other honourable members have put forth. Through this, we can make this a more inclusive chamber and one that our constituents can be proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for an excellent speech. I especially appreciated her comments about committee, because I have been on Pay Equity Committee when she was the chair, and of course she has been on Status of Women with me, and I would argue that these committees are fairly harmonious. And so I like the idea of going to first reading, taking the bills to committee so that people can input, and I wondered if she could elaborate on that idea a bit more.
Member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Yes, I want to thank my honourable member, and I do think that the committee that you chair, that I sit on, and vice versa, those committees did work very collaboratively. And I believe that our reports are actually better as a result. But one of the problems with committees, and we haven't had legislation at our committee yet, but when there is legislation, often the government is already invested in it, and there's already a stake in making sure that that legislation passes. But if legislation is referred after first reading, there isn't that sense of finality of the legislation, and when you start to move something, and I think at that point you are able to have more say, and members can have more input in advance of the legislation going to second reading. So I thank the honourable member for her question.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as a new member to the House, it's been interesting to kind of watch how we work over the last year. And I want to address two aspects of it. One is the length of time of speeches. And I've spent a lot of my life in communications. The principle was never take 10 minutes to say what you could say most effectively in 5 minutes. I find the principle exactly opposite here. We take 10 minutes or 20 minutes sometimes to say what could be said more effectively in 5 minutes. So I'd like to make a recommendation that we do move to 5-minute speeches. Second aspect is question period, and I tell all my constituents, if you're interested in theatre, watch question period. If you're interested in actual getting information, probably not so much. And so my proposal is either to look at the British model where the speaker chooses who's going to speak, or instead go to a rotational basis for the opposition members so that every member of Parliament gets the opportunity to ask their question on behalf of their constituents on a rotational basis, which is very inclusive. So every member in the opposition would get to speak. So I'm curious as to what my colleague thinks of those two recommendations.
The honourable member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Yes, I thank the honourable member opposite for raising those issues. And I think we do find that most of the time we don't use our 20 minutes. We're splitting it in two, and maybe that's something that could be institutionalized. And then depending on the bill, if it's a bill that is more technical and needs more explanation, we could have longer speeches. But on those where we want to just state our position, it could be shorter. I think that would be a great idea. And then on question period, I agree with the honourable member. I think there are many things that we could do to make question period not only better decorum, but also more equitable in terms of who is able to stand up and ask questions.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Laurentide-Labelle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the conversation about PMBs earlier on, it gave me a new idea I want to throw out there, which is to allow amendments by a bill sponsor with the consent of the seconder between the first and second hour of debate based on the content of the debate at first hour. So they'd have to justify it based on what was said. They can't just introduce some new ideas in order to fix somewhat broken but savable bills before they even get to committee and make the whole process easier and saner. So see if my colleague has any comments on that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Ottawa West Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my honourable colleague. I think that's the beauty of a debate like this, is that it sparks other ideas that are coming forward, and I think that the idea that the debate that we have in this House would then have the ability to be able to influence the changes to legislation is very much within the spirit of the other proposals that I put in.
Resuming debate, the honourable member.